Chinese food did not survive in America because it was welcomed. It survived because it learned how to disappear just enough to stay alive. When Chinese immigrants arrived in the United States in the 19th century, they did not come with the intention of changing American cuisine. They came to work, to send money home, to survive a country that never planned to let them stay. From the beginning, food was one of the only industries open to them. Not because Americans respected Chinese cooking, but because Americans did not want to do the work themselves. Cooking became both opportunity and trap. Chinese restaurants were allowed to exist, but only within invisible boundaries. They could serve Americans, but they could not offend American taste. They could operate businesses, but they could not demand dignity. They could be seen, but never fully accepted. This contradiction defined everything that followed. In the early years, Chinese cooks prepared food primarily for other Chinese workers. Meals were communal. Ingredients were imported or grown locally when possible. Techniques were familiar. The food tasted like home. But as anti-Chinese sentiment grew, Chinatowns became enclosed spaces. Movement was restricted. Jobs disappeared. Survival required adaptation. Restaurants began serving white customers not as an act of cultural exchange, but as an act of necessity. At first, Americans treated Chinese food as entertainment. Exotic, strange, something to be consumed cautiously. Newspaper writers described chopsticks as curiosities. Dishes were reviewed not for flavor, but for how unusual they appeared. This gaze mattered, because once food becomes spectacle, it stops being allowed to be itself. Chinese cooks noticed which dishes were accepted and which were rejected. Strong fermented flavors scared customers. Bones in food made them uncomfortable. Textures unfamiliar to American palates were left untouched. Every plate became a test. Slowly, dishes changed. Not all at once, not deliberately, but consistently. Ingredients that could not be sourced easily were replaced. Cooking times were adjusted. Sauces were sweetened. Frying became common because it was familiar. Menus simplified language. Regional names vanished. Everything was flattened into a single category: Chinese food. This flattening was not ignorance. It was protection. Specificity invited judgment. Simplicity invited comfort. By the early 20th century, Chinese restaurants had learned something crucial. Americans wanted Chinese food to be recognizable, not authentic. That word, authentic, did not mean what it claimed to mean. Authenticity, as Americans used it, meant alignment with expectations. Not truth, not history, but comfort. So Chinese food learned how to perform. Dishes were arranged to look appealing under dim lights. Portions were generous. Prices were low. Restaurants stayed open late, catering to workers, artists, gamblers, and night crowds. Chinese food became associated with convenience, with indulgence, with after-hours hunger. And yet, even as Americans ate it regularly, they continued to distrust the people who made it. Chinese restaurants were accused of unsanitary practices more often than white-owned establishments. Inspectors targeted them disproportionately. Rumors spread easily. Newspapers sensationalized stories without evidence. Food became a liability. Every inspection was a risk. Every complaint could lead to closure. So kitchens became cleaner than required. Ingredients were displayed openly. Windows allowed customers to see inside. Transparency became survival. This visibility shaped the cuisine itself. Cooking methods were adjusted to look less threatening. Ingredients were explained in English. Dishes were renamed to sound approachable. Chop suey was not just a dish. It was a solution. It was flexible. It used available ingredients. It looked familiar enough to be accepted. It tasted foreign enough to feel exciting. Chop suey allowed Chinese restaurants to exist in America without explaining themselves. It became the foundation of American Chinese cuisine not because it was ancient, but because it was adaptable. Adaptability is often mistaken for dishonesty. But for immigrants, adaptability is strategy. Chinese food survived by becoming something new. This survival came at a cost. As American Chinese food grew popular, its connection to China weakened in public perception. Americans began to believe the food was inherently American, that it existed solely for their consumption. Chinese cooks became invisible laborers behind a cuisine Americans claimed as their own. This invisibility was reinforced by law. The Chinese Exclusion Act prevented families from forming. Restaurants were staffed almost entirely by men. Long hours replaced home life. Kitchens became living spaces. Community was compressed into work. Food carried emotional weight. Cooking was memory. It was connection. It was the only remaining link to a life that could not be fully lived. Yet those memories were rarely served. What Americans ate was not what Chinese cooks missed. It was what Americans would accept. This separation created a quiet tension. Inside the kitchen, one world existed. Outside the kitchen, another. Over time, younger generations grew up knowing only the American version. The original flavors became distant. The adapted cuisine became tradition. This is how new cultures form. Not by preserving the past intact, but by reshaping it under pressure. American Chinese food is not fake. It is compressed history. Every fried dish contains the story of exclusion. Every sweet sauce contains the story of compromise. Every English menu contains the story of silence. When people ask whether the food is real, they're asking the wrong question. The question should be, real to whom? It is real to the families who built businesses from nothing. It is real to the workers who spent decades behind stoves. It is real to the communities who survived when few other paths were available. Authenticity is not about resemblance. It is about origin. And American Chinese food originated here, in a country that demanded adaptation as the price of existence. This cuisine tells the truth about America. It reveals how cultures are allowed to enter only when they reshape themselves. How difference is tolerated only when it becomes profitable. How acceptance often requires invisibility. Chinese food did not conquer America. It negotiated with it, and that negotiation never truly ended. Even today, debates about authenticity echo the same assumptions. That food must remain unchanged to deserve respect. That adaptation is betrayal. But survival is not betrayal. Survival is history in motion. American Chinese food is the record of people who stayed when they were not wanted. Who cooked when they were watched. Who fed a nation that refused to see them fully. That is not fake food. That is evidence.